Hello and welcome to day 7 of TBRCon2024. It is great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're tuning in live and if you're catching this up on the replay, thank you for watching. I'm Frasier Armitage, sci-fi writer, part-time robot, full-time nerd, and it is my absolute pleasure to chat with some sci-fi legends in this panel. We would have loved to have had Ada Hoffmann with us, but Ada, unfortunately, has come down with something. She's not well. So we send you our love and best wishes, Ada. And if you're listening and tuning in, please feel well soon. We're all thinking of you and we wish you the very, very best. But joining me here to talk about Aliens, not the movie. I mean, you know, maybe the movie, but just more generally Aliens, is a fantastic panel. We're going to learn from their expertise as to how we can make otherworldliness and alien things a part of our stories. So let's introduce them, and we'll go around alphabetically because we're writers. We love the alphabet, right? So I'm coming to you first, Adrian. For anybody who is unfamiliar with you and has been sleeping under a rock for the last couple of decades, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing.
Now, I was all set to come in third because I thought you meant alphabetically by surname. Yes, I am Adrian Tchaikovsky. I write sci-fi and fantasy. I've written about 50 books now, which seems insane. I'm particularly known for writing books about giant spiders from outer space.
Awesome. And how are you, Adrian? Are you doing okay today? Doing well?
I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, I'm okay.
Excellent. If I know my alphabet right, then I think it's ABC and it's Christopher next. So Christopher, how are you doing today? You all right?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Adrian, great to see you again. It's been a while. I've only written 8 books, so I got a ways to go to catch up with Adrian. I do not write about giant alien spiders. I write about alien jellyfish for the most part when I'm not writing about dragons. So I'm best known for the Inheritance cycle, which is Eragon and sequels. And then in the sci-fi world, I wrote To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. Then I had a prequel to that. My second sci-fi novel come out in May this year, and that was called Fractal Noise. And through a weird series of coincidences, I actually had a cover that was done by AI art for that book, which caused much consternation, but it was interesting to have a sci-fi book with an AI cover. That was completely unintentional, by the way.
Yeah, and what's in the book is absolutely amazing. I just finished it the other day, Christopher, and honestly, if you'd have told me that 4 people walking to a hole could absolutely have me on the edge of my seat, I wouldn't have believed you. But it was absolutely amazing. Thank you. Next, I believe it's you, Jenny. Tell us how are you doing? First of all, are you doing okay?
I am doing all right. It's early here, so I'm a little tired, but I'm okay.
Excellent.
So yeah, I only have 4 books. I'm kind of a baby compared to these guys, but 3 books. 4th is coming out this year, but I'm a video game writer by day, and I write character-driven sci-fi novels. The most recent one, Rubicon, came out last March, and then I'm also the author of the Divide series, which includes The Last Watch and The Exiled Fleet, and then the forthcoming The Relentless Legion, which will be out on November 12th.
Congrats. That is awesome. Fantastic. KB, yeah, we've got you as the very final person to introduce yourself. So how are you doing? And what do you write?
I would have been last regardless of which way we did that. So that worked out really well. I am doing great. Despite a lot of people know already, but my appendix tried to kill me earlier this year. So it was like not what I had planned for 2024, but they exist purely to make your life difficult, as far as we can tell. Speaking of like aliens and weird vestigial organs. So I am doing much better than I was previously. I write space opera and military science fiction, including some sort of weird sports related stuff in my Neo G series. And my 10th book will come out this fall. Don't ask how I did that. I'm still not entirely sure.
That's really yeah, the appendix stuff is scary, but if you get the crisis out of the way early in the year, then things then get much better later on, right? That's the way it's supposed to work. So yeah, I wish you all the best for the rest of the year, KB. That's and we've got some people in the chat. If you are here for us and you are watching this right now, please send us as many comments and questions as you can. All of your questions are bound to be better than mine. So the more that we've got, the more we'll include, and we'll go to the panel. Just so that everybody knows, we've got some people who are fairly excited about this one. Tim is excited about the panel. We've got Kentucky SF, who talks about giant spiders, Nick Cage, Superman nemesis. So that's yeah, that's some love for you, I think, Adrian, in that one. We've got somebody who's saying that The Divide is a great series. So yeah, fantastic. And also Kentucky SFF is saying that Neo G is excellent. So already lots of love from the comments for you guys. We're here to talk about aliens, and I thought it would be a good way to kick off by just getting your idea as to what you like from, as an audience member from an alien. So what if someone was to ask you, like, what's a great example of an alien done really well? How would you answer that, and what makes it a good example? Let's start by going to Jenny. What do you think to this one?
You said you wouldn't put me on the spot, Frasier. It was a lie.
Lulled you into a false sense of security. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to split that into two, because what actually interests me most, I think, about alien species are the ones that are like not present in the story, but are in the history of the world, or are like lurking in the background. I'm thinking like Prothean from Mass Effect, but there are lots of other examples where there's kind of like it's part of the history and you learn more as you go through the series, maybe, and maybe you encounter them eventually, but it's just something that's kind of like a big mystery of the story. I always really like that. So I guess that is a good example. And then another one I can think of that I just really was always really interested in is also from Mass Effect. I'm Mass Effect representing, of course.
Hey,
but,
I got Jennifer Hale to read my audiobooks.
I know. I'm so jealous about that. I'll get over it eventually.
You should ask her to read yours. She's a lovely woman.
I should. Okay, maybe I will. But yeah, the Drell from Mass Effect were always just really interesting, and that like relationship they had with the Hanar, and like there's just a lot of like socio like things happening there that were really complex and interesting. And I just think it's really interesting when you dive into those kind of like symbiotic relationships that different species have, like when you have multiple species in your story. So yeah.
That's a very cool answer. I love Mass Effect. You cannot go wrong with Mass Effect. Christopher, what about you? What's your alien of choice?
I mean, I think it depends on what you're looking for from an alien. You can look at strictly biology and say, well, what's the most interesting biologically different alien that's been created? And there's a lot of great ones. There's great ones in Mass Effect. I seem to recall Wayne Barlow, an artist, creating a cool book with some aliens in it. It's hard to choose. And of course, there's the alien from the Alien films. It's sort of like the stereotypical, greatly, stereotypical alien with interesting biology that they really thought through, especially in the first two films. But I think you can also look then, what about on the societal side of things? And then you can really get into some weird things. And there, I think the options are so enormous because they almost don't even include humans in different settings. And that I think the options are incredibly vast. But I love reading about alien species where not just the biology is different, but the society, maybe as a result of the biology, but also because their belief systems and culture is just so vastly different, while taking into account the basic needs that all organisms have, which is, food, reproduction, avoidance of pain, and survival, and all that.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and great that you can see that there's different levels to this that we're already talking about in terms of what is alien, which is great. KB, let's go to you next. If you're talking aliens, what is it you're talking?
Just to jump off of Chris's comment, I think too in Aliens, we're going to keep going back to the movie, like Aliens versus Predator, which was sort of a terrible film, and yet like one of my great joys. The dynamic of how the Predators, and the background history that they worked into that whole story. To make it so that the aliens were, purely like hunting animals when you got right down to it, and something for the predators to test their skills on as young warriors, which I thought was sort of a fascinating twist to like meld those two previously separate races into sort of the same mythos. I'm also a big fan of stuff like Anne Leckie's Ancillary Justice, where you have such a I'm a writer and I do this professionally, but such an alien feeling to things in how the culture is created and how people relate to each other, that I like stuff like that. I really, really enjoy. And I just had the chance to read a book that's coming out, I think this year, called The Stars Too Fondly. It's Emily Hamilton's debut. And in it, there are beings who are from basically another dimension. So the concept of them is really fascinating and not at all sort of what you would expect for a race of aliens. I don't want to give too much away for the plot, though. So
that sounds really exciting. That sounds really good. Yeah, thanks, KB. And what about you, Adrian?
So I'm building here on what other people have said. I think that as Christopher was saying, there's you get interesting alien sort of biology, life cycle, all of that sort of stuff is always a great deal of fun. But one of the reasons it's fun is not just because I like weird, although I do like weird. It's because when done well, it's a bit like almost like a murder mystery, in that you have all of these pieces and they fit together very, very logically, so that you can see, why does this environment give rise to a creature that works like this, and then why does the creature that works like that produce a society that functions in a certain way and has particular values and kind of emphases. And then the final one, this is one of the things we particularly see talking about Anne Leckie with the Preska in the Raj series, is how what then happens when they meet people. And that final kind of line of the alien is where the alien kind of deforms to, and where the human deforms to create that kind of dividing line. But it's the idea that you just have, if it's done well, you have this entire something that is entirely novel and really pleasingly strange, and at the same time you can absolutely see why logically it's come together in that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think in an awful lot of alien type creatures, they're very much a case of relatable, even though they are inhuman and otherworldly. I was thinking about like Arrival and the aliens in that, and the story Ted Chiang wrote to go with that. You can totally relate to what they're trying to do once you understand them, but totally inhuman. Funny that nobody mentioned Star Trek, which is given us maybe the most classic aliens that are around, but also some really terrible aliens as well, which is
if I can jump in, I think I'm jumping the gun on possibly a topic we were going to get to anyway, but Star Trek, I love Star Trek, but at the same time, as far as its aliens go, it exemplifies the alien trope I like least, which is that the vast majority of alien species in Star Trek are basically just humans, but less. So they are humans usually with like a cultural or emotional range that is less than humans, but is something that humans do. So these are the angry aliens, these are the logical aliens, these are the religious aliens, and it's just like the entire aliens are like that, and it's kind of, they are like 10% of the range of human variation, and that's your entire species. And you get this quite a lot in science fiction, and obviously when you're telling a certain type of science fiction story, it works perfectly well, but it's not actually it's not really alien. It's however much you want to gloss it and say precursor this and kind of panspermia that, it's never convincingly very alien when you just say, well, these aliens are just a bit less than human because they're humans, but they only have this one mood, really.
Which is why Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek, because they actually managed to take like the Ferengi and turn them into interesting, well-rounded, deep characters, which you wouldn't think, and not just the Ferengi, but other aliens, but which the other Star Treks didn't manage to do anything like that, I think.
I was recently chatting to Mike Chen in one of our interviews that we did for the FanFiAddict channel. Christopher, Mike Chen, if he was listening to this now, would be pumping the air and would be like applauding you. He's a massive Deep Space Nine fan. But no, we've got some really good sort of a really nice comment that Tori's made. Hi, Tori. She says that she thinks the best example of a classically and biologically different alien, the brain bug from Starship Troopers, and that's a great shout. That's a really good one. And that's good. It's a good example of the. Just sorry, I appreciate I'm hogging the mic, and I'll try not to. But what I was talking about earlier, where we see it, where that sort of communal species interacts with humans, and how they solve the human problem. How the brain bugs deal with encountering humans. It is fascinating because obviously it looks like a terrible thing to us what they do with people, but from their point of view, it presumably makes perfect sort of sense and is good use of resources. Yeah, it's really good. I think there's this other question that's come in by Jonathan, which says, did the panel get abducted by aliens? I mean, all of the aliens that you don't have to answer that, don't worry. But I was thinking, of all the aliens we've picked, none of us have really picked very nice ones to be abducted by, have we? We've all.
I mean, to be fair, my grandfather was once on a Discovery channel show, I believe, talking about a UFO he supposedly saw. So there's that.
Yeah, that's a great claim to fame. I love it. We've talked a lot about sort of societal shifts and how, as a society, something can be alien. But then we think about some of the most classic aliens, and they're all characters. And so there's this sort of, is there a difference, do you think, to writing a character, an alien character, and writing an alien race? Let's go to Christopher for your thoughts on this one.
Character always trumps. I mean, character trumps almost everything. If you write a story with a character that people relate to or find interesting, you can almost do anything at that point. But that said, I mean, we go back to the Alien films. The alien isn't really an individual character. The species is the threat. I think about, and again, I'm talking about classic Star Trek here, so nothing past, let's say, Voyager. We have Worf from the Klingons, but the Klingons themselves are sort of an iconic race for Star Trek. Same thing with the Vulcans, although I think everyone would think of Mr. Spock. I don't know. I mean, obviously you relate to the specific individual. So if you can come up with an interesting character, then that's going to hook readers and audiences in a way that just talking about the race in generic terms won't. And I think one of the difficulties with that is that I read Project Hail Mary last year, and that had a great alien character in there. But one of the difficulties is that individuals differ massively. I mean, we only need to look at humans for an example. So a lot of times I think writers want the individual alien to exemplify the generic traits of that species rather than that alien being an outlier in some reason. Sometimes they are, but rarely, it feels like. Whereas in a lot of cases, the alien that would be going out and meeting humans and interacting with them and maybe doing this and that might be a weirdo by their standards. So yes, you have a species that's has more tendency towards logic or anger, like you said, Adrian. But maybe you got the introvert nerd Klingon who all he wants to do is sit home and read and listen to Klingon opera. He's a sensitive person, and so then he's hanging out with humans. And the thing is, that's fun to do, but then you risk confusing your audience about what the basic traits of your species are if you're diverging from them on the one example you're really getting to know.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and a good pitfall to be aware of. Yeah, that's really good. KB, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think it's really important even though you might risk confusing your audience, to make sure that you are very clear about the fact that there is like the race and then the individual. Like Christopher said, you know, the character, especially for me, like that is the most important thing. And most of my stories start with the characters and what they are doing and what their lives look like. But you know, just like, you know, not all humans are representative of the human race. Like there is such a wild diversity of who people are, or even if you pull it in closer, right? Not all Americans are the same. That you want to be really careful when you're creating a character from an alien race and making sure that you're not kind of falling into stereotypes. Like Adrian mentioned earlier, right? That these are all of these aliens are angry, and like there's no diversity in the society. There's no diversity in their religion. They're all homogenous and follow the same thing. You know, it works with the Borg, right? Because there's an explanation for why they are the way they are. But for something like the Klingons, you know, Worf gave us that sort of like start to, here is a different imagining of the race, and not all of these people are warriors. You know, not all of these people are bloodthirsty and just want to fight people all the time.
You know, so something I'd throw out on that topic is, if you think about, and I know this would be horrendously offensive if we were talking about an actual sentient species, so I apologize to any aliens or humans I'm offending at the moment. But if you think of different breeds of dogs, you can broadly assign some certain traits to different breeds of dogs. Like, you know, this dog has a herding instinct. This dog has this instinct. You know, this is a snappy dog. This is a nice cuddly dog. And that can be broadly true for the breed while still being different for the individual dogs within that breed. That said, I've yet to meet an angry golden retriever. And if I ever do, my first thought is going to be, who did horrible things to this poor dog?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
You get into that like nature versus. Sorry, go ahead, Frasier.
No, go on, KB. I think we're on a slight delay, so if at any point I just seem to be talking, just plow on. It's all good.
Just keep going. I was just gonna say that's a very like that you get into the nature versus nurture conversation. What, you know, like how does a person's environment affect their development? How does the society that they grow up in and how they're treated in the society affect their development?
So on your point, KB, we've got a question from Tori. She just wants to follow this up with a statement that you made about stereotypes. She says, when working with diversity in alien races, she's just playing devil's advocate a bit, but she says, how can we decide that aliens can't fall into stereotypes? How do we know that aliens aren't just angry? So that's the question from Tori. She's followed that up with, why is that diversity so important for fictional intergalactic species? And I think that's kind of getting more to the heart of what she's saying. It's like, what's the role of diversity when we're talking about aliens? You know, because obviously it's important for us as humans, but how important is it for when you're writing an aliens, do you think?
Sorry,
I think it depends on how you want your characters. I mean, I could take it, but everybody else can chime in. I think it depends on how you want your readers to relate to your characters. As somebody else mentioned, obviously there is a time and place for sort of those stereotypical alien races, right? Where they're just, you know, hell-bent on conquest and, you know, Independence Day, like, we're just here for the resources. And it's like, there's an entire galaxy full of resources. I don't know why you need this particular silly planet. But if you are looking, like I do, if you're looking to relate to your readers in a specific fashion, and you want them to think more broadly about the way we relate to each other as people, one of the ways that you can do that is to create alien societies that are much more diverse than your typical, like, homogenous, all of these people believe the same thing. You know, there is no There are no outliers. There is no argument. There's no difference. For me personally, I don't enjoy those sort of things because they come off as relatively flat and one-dimensional and not a lot of fun to read.
Yeah. Come on, Adrian, you've got something to say on this one, haven't you?
Yeah. I mean, so two fronts really. So first of all, just thinking through the logic of it, if you have something that is like, if you this, it's like the Borg, it's got a hive mind, all of the individuals are really just kind of organs of a single entity, then that's obviously a logical standpoint for having a species that doesn't have that diversity in its apparent individual members, because they aren't actually individual members. But thinking about any other kind of situation, having a species where every member comes out dominated by a particular trait, I mean, it doesn't make a huge amount of evolutionary sense. We see variation in what we could think of as personality very in very relatively simple things on Earth, because some individuals are more reckless than others, and that's how the whole species remains evolutionarily competitive, because your environment is going to change, and sometimes it's going to be more advantageous to have recklessness, and sometimes it's going to be more advantageous to have caution. And so it makes a lot of sense for that diversity of approach to life. You can have a dominant culture which is saying, yes, we are all the warriors and we have to do warrior stuff, but how individuals relate to that is the interesting thing. So that's kind of on the kind of like, as it were, the pure logic science end of things. Fine. On the other end of things there is a very, very problematic history with fiction, and which goes straight into genre fiction, science fiction, fantasy, of doing this monotyping of the other. And it arises absolutely out of writing of monotyping the other human nationality. Frequently, the people who look a bit different to the way the writer looks, that they are all in a certain way. They're all they're all less than we are in a certain way, and that that means that we are better than them, and B, it kind of excuses anything we might want to do to them because they're all savage and aggressive and fierce, and therefore we're allowed to murder them in vast numbers. So I think that, quite aside from what I think is a perfectly good logical case for it, there's also a case of be really, really careful if you want to write the sort of monoculture of ravening monsters that you're able to mow down, because you're kind of taking part in a rather problematic tradition.
Yeah, it's a really,
definitely,
really good point. Sorry,
definitely agree with everything KB and Adrian. Sorry. Overlapping. But yeah, definitely agree with everything KB and Adrian are saying. And just to touch on that whole monolith side of things, I think that's where, for me personally, I love subverting tropes. So like setting that up as like, oh yeah, these are the big bad guys, and then like being able to bring in an example of that race, and having this happens in my Divide series where, we meet one of the aliens, spoiler alert, and, they give you more context of what actually happened in their history and their side of the war, and, the different perspectives. And that's where things start to get really juicy and interesting for me as a writer, is where you can kind of take that trope that is very problematic and like have people think that that's where you're going, and then turn it on its head at some point.
Yeah, and I guess the third pillar of this is, as you say, it's more interesting that way, rather than just having this kind of these cartoon bad guys turn up and be cartoonishly bad so that you can defeat them. It's just having that nuance, even if they are still the antagonist in the story, having that nuance and variation amongst them just makes for a more interesting story, as diversity generally does.
So in the chat, Tori's made two interesting points that I wanted to jump on. So one of them is, and I've always liked this, which is, you see in films and stuff, why are aliens invading Earth? Well, they want our water or something like that, which is complete nonsense. There are so many resources out in space. The only real resource we have that you wouldn't find anywhere else is the life here, the biology, which is unique, as far as we know, unique and probably the most valuable thing you could find out there. So yes, they are coming to kidnap you and perform experiments on you, because that's the only thing worth doing with the the creatures here. But the other question from Tori was, if an alien is meant to be different from humans, why assign them human traits? And this was something I was hoping to talk about on this panel, because I remember when I was growing up, there was a fair bit of talk from scientists and authors about alien life being essentially incomprehensible. You know, you just would not be able to necessarily communicate with an alien intelligence. And I'm not ruling that out. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about some intelligence from another dimension, something that's completely different from what we understand, that could be a possibility. But, you know, I look at all the life we have here on Earth. We are, in essence, surrounded by aliens. There are, you know, there's an amazing amount of diversity in creatures on this planet who reproduce and live in very different ways, but they're all governed by the same basic needs: food, reproduction, safety. And we can communicate and interact and understand those with a lot of these animals, and, you know, understand their basic motivations. What we can't understand is their sensory stimulus and how they interpret that necessarily, you know, because we don't experience that ourselves. But the basic stuff is the same for all living creatures, and it has to be if we're there to survive and flourish. Again, I'll go back to the social stuff, because I think that's where you really get tripped up. I mean, like, even you go to a different country or a different time with humans, and, you know, all the basic biological urges are the same, but if you don't bow down to the full moon 3 times every month, you're a heretic, and you're going to be thrown off into the into the volcano to appease the gods. And if you don't understand that social context, you get thrown off into the lava to appease the gods. And that's really where things can get strange and weird, aside from the fact that they're all giant spiders.
I mean, just to build on that, I think there's almost in the course of a species development through evolution and societal evolution, I feel there are 2 poles of convergence. So like Christopher says, early on, any kind of species is presumably going to want to acquire energy, resources in order to fuel itself. It's going to want to be able to avoid things that will stop it existing. So you have basic ideas of fearing a thing or knowing pain or so forth may well be quite universal, just because they are big drivers of a thing surviving or not. And that's a thing we may well have in common with basically anything we meet at a very basic level. At a much, much more sophisticated level, when you get to the point of at least like a human level sapience, you build tools, you look at the universe is going to be the same universe. And whilst you may relate to it in different ways, the maths behind that, the equations, the elements, are all going to be the same ones. And so there is another convergence where we can potentially start interacting meaningfully with an alien race at that very sophisticated level, purely because we are all children of the same creation.
Yeah, I
that's
think
really
as
good.
far as relating to a species, I'm thinking of an arc I actually read, Jack Campbell's In Our Stars. I think it comes out in April or May. I don't want to get into spoilers, but the alien presence in it is really interesting, because they've kind of passed this point of needing those sort of basic resources of safety. Like, their technology has gotten to a point where they can defend themselves easily. They can go from solar system to solar system and do what they want. And what they want is to acquire knowledge. And it's that simple. They want to know all about the races. They're completely peaceful. They don't want anything to do with it, but they can still defend themselves. So when, you know, the rash alien races that are scared of them start firing missiles at them, they can protect themselves, but they don't ever fire back. And I just found that really interesting to dive into as far as like relatability, because like if I was an alien, I would be going out there doing that thing, collecting all the data, like trying to figure out all the different things that make different species unique and the different things that they have. And I just found that a really interesting take that I hadn't really seen before.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's an awful lot that has been mentioned that we could pick up on and that we could talk about. Like I was about Christopher's point about the idea of we're surrounded by aliens. I was at BristolCon earlier this year, and there was a panel about underwater fiction, and they were making the point there that an awful lot of that is like a first contact story, you know, because we don't know so much about the world in which we are. And we could talk about like the role of like alien fiction. Is it about understanding? Is it about empathy, you know, and reaching out and understanding the humanity of things? Do you think, you know, does writing aliens make us more human, in your opinion, guys? What do you think to this? Let's start with KB.
I don't know if anybody remembers this show from, I think it was like the mid 90s, but it was called Sequest.
Yes.
Which was like the absolute such a great, and it was all about like plumbing the depths of the oceans on this planet. You know, just to right off of Christopher's comments about like there's so much stuff that we don't know about Earth and how things function and how you know, especially stuff like the deeper you get into the ocean, it really does become very alien in that sense, that it's nothing we've seen. It's by all physical rights shouldn't be able to survive in that kind of environment, and yet there they are. So I do love the idea of writing what one would consider human traits into aliens, for two reasons, I think. One is that I call this the dinglehopper problem frequently, which is where you're like, you don't want to make up new stuff for things that people already know, right? We're telling a story to the reader, so you need to make it comprehensible in some fashion. And if you're writing about an alien race that is so incomprehensible that your readers can't follow because you're using all of this extra terminology or things that don't make any sense to explain what is, you know, a fork, that you run into all sorts of problems. And it makes, like, you want to err on the side of understanding when you're telling a story, no matter how kind of fantastical your alien races are. And I frequently look at it as like you're translating a story into something that the readers can understand. And the second reason for it is that that is the stories that we as humans understand. So relating stuff to human traits, you know, I mean, that's why Star Trek, the original series, was so popular, because they took these like relatively political, very human issues and translated them into something that was alien, for people to like think about and talk about and digest, and it worked as a format, like undoubtedly, and continues to work, you know, throughout the years. Every new iteration, I think, of Star Trek has done a phenomenal job with telling these stories in a manner that resonates with human audiences, and maybe alien audiences. Who knows? Like, we don't.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And what about you, Jenny? How do you feel about this sort of where humanity and the alien sort of crosses over?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to the, you know, topic we were talking about before as far as relatability. Like, just, you know, that's what makes us human, is relating to each other. We're social creatures. As much of an introvert as I am, that's the truth of the matter. So just, you know, being able to relate to them in such a way, but also understand and accept their differences. And I think that is, you know, part of what makes sci-fi so great, is being able to hold up that mirror and see those kinds of things, you know, reflected in all aspects, including alien species. So
yeah, that's a great answer. What about you, Adrian?
So yeah, I think there's a lot of mileage. I mean, it's not the sort of alien stuff I particularly write myself, but you absolutely can do a lot, and Star Trek did a lot with that idea of, well, here are some aliens and they do this spectacularly dumb thing. Look at this dumb thing they do. These guys are half white and half black, or half black and half white, and they hate each other, and they can't see that they're basically the same. And it feels very heavy-handed, I think, now, because, you know, we're however many decades on, but actually one of the real gifts of speculative fiction is you can sneak stuff past people's sort of internal gatekeepers. You can get an idea to someone who, if you just wanted to talk about it to them in the real world, they would instantly clam up. They would say, oh no, you're one of them. I am absolutely opposed to you because you believe this thing. Whereas if you introduce it in a speculative way, and put those trappings around it, you can actually get people to think about stuff that they might otherwise just flat out refuse to do. I mean, I think also one of the things I do like to do, which is almost kind of like the mirror image of the, you know, these are the angry aliens who are kind of like humans but less, is do the humans but more. So present non-human species which is basically running into the same problems we've had, but actually has better ways of solving them. Possibly because of what they are, or possibly because of just how they approach problem solving in general. This is one of the things I do a few times in Children of Time. The spider civilization, that, and for scientific accuracy, they are not aliens. They are human derived. They are Earth derived species that have been kind of engineered a bit, and then just based on Earth living spiders. But they are still plenty alien when it comes to how they look at the universe and how they deal with problems. And sometimes how they deal with problems is better than how humans have dealt with the same ones.
Yeah, that's a really good point. How an alien perspective can help us to examine our own, you know, and look at, is there a better way? I really, really like that. And what about you, Christopher?
I mean, I would go with what everyone here has said as well. One thing we haven't really talked about that I think is interesting too, which is you can look at how a species has evolved, whether it's humans or, you know, your hypothetical, your aliens that you're creating, and say, well, yes, they evolved in this certain environment, but then look at how that gets translated in, assuming they're a technological species, how that gets translated into a quote unquote modern environment. I mean, if you look at humans, you know, as best we know, you know, we evolved essentially in a savanna environment in small tribes out in Africa, and biologically modern humans have been around for something like 300,000 years. I mean, there's some evidence that we've gotten a little more cooperative over the millennia, but in general, biologically modern humans have been around for around 300-some thousand years. So all of those behaviors, though, that the genetic behaviors and stuff are still there with us. And we're adapted for an environment that we don't really live in anymore. And yet we're still deploying a lot of those behaviors and adapting it to our technology, to our social media, to our magic technological mirrors that let us talk with people across the world. And that's really interesting. You could say, yeah, well, you've got your aliens that are, you know, they evolved in the ocean and they've got tentacles and they do this and that. But now they have spaceships and now they have their version of Facebook. And, you know, how do they actually interact? How does that work? Which I think is really fantastic. Also kind of tied into the human traits. I'm a pessimist, I think, to a degree, in the sense that I can't see a species ever being 100% peaceful, simply because there's always going to be an evolutionary advantage for some individual or group that's willing to take advantage of another one. And although cooperation increases and seems to be a necessity for technological evolution, even if you're postulating an alien that is a planet-wide super brain fungus sort of thing, right? Well, it's probably subjugating all the other species on the planet, or controlling them in some way, or exploiting them in some way. There's just too much advantage for individuals or groups to take advantage of others in some way or another. So I can't see 100% peaceful alien species, or even if they choose to be generally peaceful, any technologically advanced species that has risen to the top of the food chain is going to be, by definition, the scariest animal on the planet. And it is kind of weird to look at humans at our, you know, hairless kind of, we don't have claws, we don't have big teeth, we're not the fastest, we're not the strongest, but we really are the scariest creatures on the planet. A group of humans is the scariest thing on this planet, which is rather odd to think. You know,
hopefully not this group of humans. Just
well, you know, we have a bear sanctuary right near where I live, and they have grizzly bears that have been they're problematic, and so they bring them there so they can be rehabilitated or just kept in safety and not out killing people. And I took my son there one time, and there was this huge grizzly who's not even fully grown, who had an entire tree trunk and was just casually rolling it around their neck and between their paws, almost like a martial arts kata or something. And I'm seriously, it was an entire tree trunk, a large tree trunk, and the bear was handling it with almost no effort. And I was like, you know, one-on-one, no human has a chance against that bear. But you give us a piece of technology, and the bear has no chance against us, and that's really something.
Well, there's a reason there are bears in a human-made bear sanctuary rather than the other way around.
I think I just had.
I mean, and I would say, like,
go on, KB.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No.
Oh,
go,
I was
go
just
on.
gonna say,
it's
like,
this delay.
In theory, no humans have like a chance against a bear, and yet like people have survived bear attacks. So it's one of those fascinating things. I think where one of my favorite like ridiculous Tumblr posts that keeps popping up is that Earth is Space Australia one, where they're talking about like aliens invading the Earth, and they keep coming up against like all of these absolutely terrible things like kangaroos and bees and I think mosquitoes, like stuff that, you know, and then also bears, I think at some point. But they're just like, these poor aliens are like completely outclassed and have no chance to take over the planet because they're just, you know, and they've got like captive humans who are just like, well, you probably don't want to mess with that. And, you know,
there's an entire
alien guy goes to fight a kangaroo.
There's an entire subreddit devoted to that concept that Earth is essentially a hell planet, and the other aliens are just like, "What's wrong with you?" And it's called, I think it's called, you know, Humans F Yeah. I'm not gonna say the full title, but there's some really fun stories in there. Like, what if we're actually the scary monsters, and we have to play nice with everyone because everyone grew up in gentle Eden planets, and they're like, yeah, they're like, they have exposed pieces of teeth that they chew their food with. They intentionally put acid on their food, and you know, you can cut off one of their limbs and they'll heal, and then they'll come back and they'll kill you. And
I think I had an epiphany while you were speaking, Christopher, and you were saying about sort of like, because we talk about all these different aliens with different biologies, and then you were saying about alien Facebook, and I was like, but what if aliens don't have faces? And then maybe that's why it got changed to meta. Maybe that's it was already so ahead of it. I can't market it to these guys, you know. There's in terms of just some things in the comments. Jonathan has said about Downward to Earth by R. Silverberg being hitting on some powerful alien and human species relations. So that's a really good shout for this type of fiction. I don't want to get sort of like I'm a bit wary about putting this next comment up, but Tori basically was thanking Adrian and KB for your insights, and then she said that both of you are geniuses. So I just thought, you know, at the risk of what may happen next with that comment, I can't not put it up really. So but yeah, well done guys. That's high praise. In terms of, so we've talked about society, we've talked about individuals. Let's move on to these different layers of, you know, biology and technology and communication, all these types of things. When you set out to write an alien species or an alien character, what's your starting point, but what is your finishing point? Like, do you have to be an anthropologist, you know, or a sociologist in order to write an alien species? Or, you know, at what point do you say, right, okay, I've developed this enough that I'm ready to sort of, you know, play around with these and to write this? What in terms of how you go about it in your processes, what's your start and finish points from idea to starting the actual writing of it? Let's go to KB first on this one.
I am first and foremost a pantser. Like, just good luck. Like, I don't know what's happening in this book any more than you do until I'm done writing it. And I also I frequently start with characters and who the characters are at their core. What do they want? Where they're coming from. I have a habit of developing like a ton of backstory, like before the story started. I'm really always fascinated with like what happened to get them to this point and make them who they are. 90% or 99% of that never makes it into the book itself, except in, you know, maybe a mannerism or something that they say as an off comment to somebody else, that sort of thing, which is a tricky line. Like you want that depth. You want to know the history of where people came from, and like Adrian was saying, the evolutionary steps that got them to this point, both socially and historically and physically, and all of that stuff, I feel is important when you're creating worlds and creating characters. But you don't want to info dump like a ton of that into a story, or at least I don't enjoy reading it. I think it's important to the creation, but I don't think it's necessarily a lot. You know, you're not going to get 15 pages from me about how starships work. I don't find that type of thing fascinating. You're also not going to get 15 pages of like the history of how this society came to be. So yeah, I tend to start with characters, and then will frequently work my way outward and see what parts of those actually relate to the story that I'm telling, like in that little slice of moment in time where the action is happening.
Yeah, that's a really, really good answer. Let's go to Jenny. What about you? What does your process look like when you dream up an alien?
Yeah, so I'm in the same book as KB. I don't know that there's an alien in my book until it's in the book. Typically, you know, I might have an idea that it's if it's the first in a series, that it's a world that has other aliens. Maybe I don't know that, and then they show up and I'm like, cool, they have aliens, and then you kind of go back and fix it later. So there's not a lot of forethought in that sense. But it's been interesting writing my series because, you know, I did Pants that first book and aliens showed up, and now I have to deal with that in the other books because there are aliens apparently in my world. And that's been fun as far as like not only differentiating them, but like setting up, like I was kind of talking about before, as far as like a history of like aliens that were here before that were wiped out, and like seeing the remnants that they've left behind and how that has impacted it. And then, you know, spoiler alert, maybe meeting some of them in future books and things like that. So yeah, it's a very loosey-goosey process. And then in the editing phase, it's going back through and trying to find like, okay, this is what is critical to the plot of the story. And like KB said, not info dumping anything that's not necessary. And that's one of the benefits of pantsing, is that you typically don't do that because you don't know that it's coming. So you don't have a whole Wikipedia article already written about it to dump in there. And that can come later, you know, it can go on your World Anvil for your Patreon or whatever, but it's not something that needs to actually make it into the book. But it is good stuff for you to know once you have established that, okay, this species is important for my world and it's going to be moving forward into other books if it's a series, and I'm going to need to know, you know, thinking ahead a little bit as far as like, okay, are these going to show up? Like, how are they going to interact? Are they going to start a war? Like, what's going to happen in the future of this? And kind of setting those seeds up early, so you're not just randomly like pulling things out of a hat in book 2 and 3.
Yeah, that's also a really good point. Yeah, great stuff, Jenny. Thank you. What about you, Adrian, on this one?
So I'm quite different. I with all of my writing and whatever I'm doing, I basically need to have very solid ground beneath me. I still usually plot out the actual plot to the books point by point, but whatever I do, I always have the universe or the world. And when I'm working with aliens in particular, I start off with an idea, right? I've got a particular, what if you had an alien race that was like this? And it's the like this usually comes down to a particular, it's a life cycle point, or if it's a some sort of biological quirk that would then lead on to really interesting, hopefully sociological constructs later on in the development. And I think about it usually like dropping a stone into a pond. So that's my starting idea, and I'll drop it in, and then I will just see where the ripples go. I will let the world kind of logically construct itself from that point. So if you have that thing, then this, then this, then this, and eventually you have this very solid interlaced world. And I mean, I agree. Info dumping is a problem. It's one of the, getting necessary information to the reader is always a big technical skill that we learn, and restraining oneself from not getting unnecessary information to the reader is also a technical skill that we learn, and they are both equally difficult in different ways. But I find that whether or not the information reaches the page, I need it, because that way everything I write is consistent. It all fits into the same world, and at the end of it, it hopefully means I don't have a lot of rewrites to do for the second draft.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. And what about you, Christopher?
Well, to be fair, I haven't created that many alien species, so my approach may go in a different direction in the future, but I'm very much like Adrian. I'm not a pantser. I need a plot. I need a roadmap in order to write and achieve the effect that I want to achieve. And with aliens, if I'm creating an alien species that's basically a cameo appearance in a story, I don't really care if it's a plant or it's a animal or something. It can be something I come up with almost off the top of my head. But when it's a larger species, and especially a sentient species, sapient species, I really put a lot of thought into that. So for the main alien species in my Fractalverse setting, I start with biology, and then I proceed from the biology to the society, and then to the individual character that I may actually be writing about. And then I feel like I have a general solid idea of how to approach writing that individual, and then also the larger groups of that species. And that, it's a problem actually I've run into like with fantasy, which is like, if you were to write truly accurate fantasy, especially if you're writing stuff on a completely imaginary world, but even if it's like, alternate history in Earth, and this is even a problem with like historical fiction, if you're truly accurate to the setting, you'll end up writing something that's very, very difficult for someone to read in the modern day. Like you're writing something in the time of Shakespeare or Chaucer, and you're using period accurate language and spelling. It's going to be very difficult for a modern reader to get into that. So same thing when writing about an alien is, it's like, how deep do you go, and how alien are you making your aliens, and how much do you go into their culture? And at some point, if you need them to communicate with a human, then you have to figure out, how easy is that communication going to be? How can they communicate, and so forth and so on. All of which are, great storytelling opportunities, but it is something that takes time and energy to think about. And I try to put at least a fair bit of time and energy into it.
Yeah, that point, thou makest doth be goodeth, I think is, but I think that's the thing for me. When I was, I've only written a handful of stories with aliens in. Only like one of them is out there, and it's a short story. So it's no more than about 8,000 words. But I spent so long thinking about the aliens from the point of the society, then and the biology and the language, and what would they be like, and it's amazing how deep you can go into that process before you start putting pen to paper with this kind of thing. I really like the fact that for anybody who's listening, there's no, if you want to pants an alien, great. If you want to plot an alien, great. Just when it comes to developing alien races, however you do it is the way to do it, which is, I think that's really helpful for the listeners, which is good. Oh, we've got a question here from Dutch Daddy Gamer, who has just joined us. So, hello, Dutch Daddy Gamer. He asks a question to you, Christopher. Do you have a so-called world-building Bible for your series as well?
I do of a sort. I'm in the very fortunate position to have a couple of assistants that I've hired over the years, and they have built me a personalized, essentially, Wikipedia, both for my fantasy series and for my science fiction setting. And that keeps track of all the details for me, and I write huge amounts of notes that go into that. But even without that luxury, I would do what I did when I started out, which is I just keep large amounts of Word files and keep track of all the pertinent details. Because the thing is when I started out, I was a bit arrogant in my own memory. I thought, well, I'm not going to forget this stuff. It's too important. You know what? You're going to forget, especially as the years go by and you write more books. So I write everything down. You know, what color the character's eyes are, how many tentacles the alien has, everything about their, you know, any pertinent information or detail. And you think it's overkill, and maybe it is, but it really, you know, saves my bacon whenever I have to look something up or write about something after stepping away from it for a book or two. So, you know, with my most recent book, Murtag, I had exactly that experience where I was coming back to a series I hadn't really written in for 11 years, and having those notes and those resources was fantastic. Saved me so much time and energy, saved me from having to reread the books, which I didn't really want to do.
Yeah, that's great. It's a really good answer. I want to just come back to something that Jenny mentioned earlier, because she mentioned about having fun and playing around with subversion and subverting ideas, which was a really, really good point. And I think because we have so many different types of aliens that already exist in fiction, is subversion something that is important to, you know, to keep the alien subgenre alive, do you think? Or is it, you know, is it more fun to subvert an alien, or is it more fun to sort of just play around with our expectations of what an alien should be? What do you think about that? Let's come to you, Jenny, because you were the one who mentioned it earlier. So what do you think about this?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I just, in general, I always think about subverting tropes. You know, I don't, as I established, I am a pantser, so I don't always go into it knowing that I'm going to try to establish it or subvert a trope. But that's usually just kind of where it ends up as I go through a story. So with aliens, it's the same thing where it's like, okay, like I don't, like we've kind of talked about and touched on, you know, you don't want to create the culture as a monolith thing. I think I've heard it called Planet of Hats too, kind of where like everything is the same on a planet. So like avoiding that, and just it can be just interesting with perception as far as like, you know, especially when two species, you know, if a human and an alien species are at war and the war ends, that's what is happening in basically in my Divide series. And then them slowly learning what the other side's truth is and that kind of thing can kind of help you subvert some of those tropes. I don't think you have to, you know, if you just want to play on like some of the like fun tropes because you like tropes, go for it. I think that's fine. You know, you want to avoid things that are problematic as far as like using like a culture as like a stand-in sort of for an alien species, those kinds of things. But otherwise, I think, you know, if you want to subvert them, great. If you don't, I don't think you have to do that in order to write an interesting alien species.
You know, speaking of subversion, you know who I think wrote some of the most interesting aliens here and there was actually Douglas Adams.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Yeah,
and he wasn't concerned with realism in the slightest.
Yeah, totally. Hitchhikers is, it's, and if I was gonna be abducted, I think that would be a great universe to be abducted into. That would be. Adrian, what about you on this one about the idea of subversion?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, whatever we write and however we write it, we are always going to be in conversation with the tropes of the genre, whether we are following them or working against them. So, for example, I don't tend to have that in the forefront of my mind when I'm working, but when I'm done, I can usually look back and say, yeah, I mean, this is where I've basically been in dialogue with this particular or that particular idea or that book that I previously read. I've obviously taken something from that and thought, well, all right, well, this is how I would do it. But I mean, I think that kind of comes down to a certain extent, it's the water we swim in. We are always interacting in our own personal ways as creators with the body of literature that's come before, with the films, with the TV, all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's really true. That's great. KB?
You know, to be honest, I think everybody really said anything that I could have said. I don't know that I have anything to add for that.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Yeah, perfectly answered question. That's brilliant. This idea of development, because that's what we're sort of the topic of the panel, so developing alien races. The idea of development is an interesting one, because I guess, you know, we as a species are in a continual state of development. And it's an interesting one to think about. Well, how far do you develop, or how far should a story develop an alien species, you know, from within that story? Like, you know, is it necessary to see development of an alien species through a story, or is it okay to write an alien species that has already developed and that stays the same? You know, because obviously we're talking about this idea of development. I just want to explore that a little bit. So what do you think? I mean, does it depend on the type of story you're writing or the type of aliens you create? Or, you know, is it necessary to do one, or, you know, is it up to the author? What's everybody's view on that? Let's start with Christopher.
I think it really depends on the type of story you're writing and the time scale. If you're writing a story that takes place over the course of a couple of days versus a couple of millennia, you're going to have a really different experience and a different opportunity to show development. You know, that to me would really be the basic thing. And of course, if you are writing a novel, you're probably writing about dramatic events. So the dramatic events themselves may be a good opportunity to show development for both humans or some other species, in which case that might actually be what you're grappling with. But again, to me, it would really depend on the scale. And how do you define development? Is it technological advancement? Is it social advancement? You know, there are so many ways that could play out. And if it's social advancement, I would argue, you know, it's going to take more time than technological changes. And of course, technological changes drive social changes and vice versa. So, you know, I know that's a rather vague answer, but it really does seem really specific to the story and the scope of the story.
Yeah, no, it's a really good answer. That was really good. KB, what's your feelings on this one?
I would agree with what Christopher said, that it really is going to depend kind of on what the nature of your story is. You know, is this a flashpoint moment that does cause change in a society or in a alien race, versus, you know, something softer that isn't necessarily like world shattering, you know, ripple effect all the way through a society or a race. Most of my stories are character driven. So you're looking, like, I'm more concerned with like the personal development and personal character arcs than I am necessarily like the overarching thing. That said, the Fairy and War trilogy, which is the second trilogy in my Hail series, does sort of deal with like this long-standing war between two alien races and how the fallout from that and the like Hale's efforts to bring peace between, you know, negotiate a peace between these two races, sort of causes that sort of development between these two races and also within the two races themselves.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's great. What about you, Jenny?
Yeah, I think, you know, I agree with what's been said already. For me, I think in the stories that I've written so far, it's been more about like the development of the perception of that race, if that makes sense, like from the character's perspective. So like I haven't written from alien POV except an epilogue that got cut from the third book, so that won't be in it. It was really fun to write. Like it was the most fun I've had writing in years, like just because it was like, how do I write from like this alien that I've already developed as a character, and like how did they think and how did they phrase things? And it was super fun, but it won't be in the book. Maybe it'll go on my Patreon or something. But anyways, so most of my stuff is about like characters learning how like different things that they thought about history, how the perception has changed, how that affects the plot, and then like acting on that. So it's really been more about like, you know, like most of my stories are pretty short timescales. I think Rubicon is the longest, and it takes the course of like 3 months. So they're all like pretty short. I think the last watch is like 2.5 days or something like that. So like really short, but they're learning things throughout that they thought that they knew and are learning, oh, maybe everything we thought we knew is false and things like that. So it's really more about like thinking about, okay, what is the truth? And then how do I slowly uncover that through the story?
Yeah, that's awesome. And Adrian, finally to you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've got much to add. It depends on the story you're telling. And quite often, if you're telling that story, especially from a very human point of view of we have met the aliens, you're not necessarily going to see development in the aliens unless meeting with humans has that kind of fairly broad scale catastrophic effect. I mean, I suppose you could say that the aliens in the War of the Worlds develop in that they develop a horrible cold and then all die. But it's very much down to the story you want to tell.
Yeah, totally. That's really good. So for anybody who's listening into this and is thinking, right, okay, I have to, within my story, I have to do this in order to make the aliens like this. No, it's your rules. You make it, what you want to make it. In terms of anybody who, again, just who is listening into this and is thinking, right, I really want some tips on, when it comes to writing and creating and these kinds of things. I mean, we're not here as writers to give rules to other writers, are we? But is there just anything that you found to be useful in your writing, or any kind of pitfalls that you've encountered when you've been writing aliens that you may not have expected to encounter when you first set out to write that story? Anything that's particularly useful for somebody to know, or anything that's useful for somebody to avoid? Those kinds of tips would be really welcome, I think. So if anyone's got some, it'd be great if you could share them. I'm going to go to KB first on this one, just to see if you've got any of KB's top tips when it comes to writing aliens.
Why do I have to go first again? Let's see. I'm trying to think. I don't know that there's any like specific things. I mean, we sort of covered the gamut of pay attention to what your individual character looks like versus what the race as a whole looks like. Pay attention to your world building, in that you're not just focused on the planet of hats, right? You are focused on how all of these things. The big piece of advice that I constantly give people as far as writing goes is to always treat your characters as if this story that you're telling is just a moment in their lives, and pay attention to what happens both before the book and what happens after the book, because those things are important. I mean, if they die in the book, which happens, obviously there's not necessarily an after, but you want to look at characters who have fully realized lives outside of the story that you were telling. And I think that always makes characters far more interesting than if you sort of neglect those pieces, the bookend pieces.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. The reason I keep coming to you first, KB, is because I'm looking across the screens and I see your hair, and it's just so stunning in the color. It's just I must ask KB. It's that's what it is. So yeah, apologies for that. Adrian, have you got any sort of top tips that you've discovered in your writing?
I mean, I feel interesting aliens come out of sort of wide reading, both in listening to people who do sort of astrobiology, listening to people who mess around with speculative evolution, which is one of my personal favorites, or just looking at the natural world. Because I mean, as we've mentioned a couple of times, there's so much crazy stuff on the planet that most people are not aware of, and that if you blew it up into a whole sort of fully sapient technological alien species with that as its basis, would give you some crazy stuff. It's, I think that if you took random animal species and really drilled down into what made it itself, you'd end up with something that's more alien than 90% of aliens in fiction.
Yeah, it's a really good point. On that, I learned the other day that a crocodile has more sense organs in its mouth than we do in our human hand. So it means that when it carries its young in its mouth, it is more sensitive to their movements than we might be to even our own children when we're holding them. And when you think about a crocodile, it's not the first thing you think of, is it? But it's just crazy how much out there that we don't know or that we learn, and then it inspires ideas of, let's take that and make an alien species out of it.
Or, for example, I mean, all right, aphids, such as infest your rose bushes. Aphids have a series of basically cloned female-only generations, and then they will have a generation with males and females, and then they'll have a generation that can fly.
Yeah.
And just imagine if you had a full-on sapient species where you just had that much variation from one generation to another of just how you worked and how you would build sort of societal norms around that.
Yeah, excellent. Jenny, have you got any tips to share?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, this is getting kind of mechanical, but that I think of is like gestures. I put a lot of like, you know, they raise an eyebrow or they like do a thing as they're talking to each other, and thinking about like, okay, they don't have eyebrows to raise, so what do they have? Like, and how can you like make that consistent? One of the things that I did with one of my species is like when they're like sort of thoughtful or in agreement with something, they'll like raise their chin. So instead of like a nod, it's like a lifted chin kind of a thing. And you can kind of come up with like a list of those as like replacements for things that are like notoriously sort of human gestures, and we know what they mean, but they might not like mean anything to your humans, but at least they're being consistent in the kinds of things that they're doing.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Excellent. And Christopher, what about you?
Well, I mean, on a very broad level, I always recommend, despite the success of Pantsers here, I always recommend plotting your story out beforehand, just as a form of safety net, and just giving yourself a good groundwork so you can focus on the writing itself versus trying to solve every problem as you're writing the story. But that's my approach. Specific to aliens, I think a lot of what Adrian was talking about, and I would say, you know, read stuff about different human cultures, because there's been a vast array of beliefs and behaviors throughout history, and you can really drill down into very different ways of thinking, and I think that's a useful exercise when it's coming to write about aliens. And then, of course, reading a lot about biology and different animals. I think if you don't have an awareness of the different forms of life just on this planet, it's very easy to sort of default to a human and mammalian-centric view of biology and think, well, of course, you have a female and you have a male and they get together and they reproduce, and that's basically how life works. And well, no, there's some really weird variations out there, and there's lots of ways to approach this, and it's really worth getting there. And I will happily admit that I have not succeeded at this entirely, but I really am intrigued by this idea of truly capturing an alien way of thinking while still basing it on the basic needs of a biological creature, you know, reproduction, pain avoidance, resource gathering, and all of that. And I think reading, you know, anthropological sources, reading historical stuff is one way to go about doing that. And then, of course, just, you know, sitting and daydreaming.
Yeah, that's the best. That's sit and daydream. Next time that my wife says, "What are you doing?" I'm saying, "I'm following advice from Christopher Paolini." That's exactly what I'm going to
you know, and look at things from a different point of view on occasion. I mean, like you could look at the first Alien film as the story of a poor little orphan alien who gets kidnapped by a bunch of other alien creatures who then try to kill it for trying to get a single warm meal.
Yeah.
You know, it's a newborn. It's a newborn that's trying to get a meal, and all these aliens are trying to kill it.
Yeah.
After kidnapping it.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a great perspective. I think that would be I would love to read that book. That would be fantastic. The poor hard done to xenomorph. That would be that'd be brilliant. So it's just very final question for you all. Is there a type of story within sort of the sphere of aliens, because there's so many different types of alien type story, that you would love to sort of see in the future? You know, either sort of taking it from like First Contact, or, you know, taking it from like, okay, this is Save the Aliens kind of types of things. Is there one of these kinds of things that you would just love to emerge as being like super popular?
I'll jump in real fast because I have a short answer.
Yeah.
I'd love to see a couple more stories that treat humans as the old ones, as the first ones. Because, I mean, odds are we aren't, but, you know, what if we are? What if we are the first sentient species or sapient species that's evolved, and technological species that's evolved? Again, odds are deeply against that, but there is a chance. And I always thought that'd be interesting. Like, what if we are the old ones? What if we are the precursors?
Yeah, that'd be great. What about Jenny? What about you? Have you got something that you'd love to see?
Yeah, I think kind of the opposite of that, as far as like I would love to see more like alien archaeology, almost like, you know, people going to planets, like finding alien hieroglyphics and like piecing together things like that, and just like doing, I'm one of the newest stories I'm working on now. It's not like under contract or anything, but just is where one of the characters is an alien archaeologist. And I'm just kind of, since I'm pantsing, I don't know the plan, but since I'm like working through it, it's like kind of fun to think about, oh, like what if they went to a planet? Like what kinds of things might they find like buried under the rock or things like that? Like I would love to see more of that.
Alien Indiana Jones. Yes, bring it on. That's fantastic. Adrian, what about you?
So I'm particularly fascinated with the situation where you get alien and human meeting, and it's transformational for both sides. It's certainly something that I'm writing about quite a lot, but just this idea of, because I mean, honestly, there's a lot of sci-fi out there where we meet aliens. It doesn't really make much difference. I mean, maybe they invade the Earth a bit, maybe we kind of meet them on their planet or whatever, but it's just like, and then everything goes on, you know, and it's kind of like humans carry on doing human things, but you kind of would hope that meeting aliens would be transformational. That first moment of, all right, we genuinely haven't been alone as sapient creatures in the universe, whether it's finding their traces or meeting them themselves or however. But specifically that idea that the meeting creates something new that is sort of potentially greater than the sum of its parts is always fascinating to me. And also potentially absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, definitely. And KB, Christopher saved you from me coming to you first this time, so I saved you for last. So what about you? What would you love to see?
You know, I would actually really love to see, I've been super into low stakes things lately. I think for obvious reasons, like the rest of the world is so terrible that I want my fiction to like not rip me through a sieve and take me into pieces. But I would love to see more like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy type of stuff, right? Like sort of silly, fun, just like alien races that maybe aren't necessarily scientifically accurate, but are still really funny, you know, like Vogons reciting terrible poetry, that sort of stuff. Because I think it would just be a lot of fun to read.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, more silly aliens. Yeah, that's fantastic. If everybody if there was just one book of each of those things, that would be just make such a great year of reading, wouldn't it? Just for those stories, that'd be brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. And yeah, we've got a Tori. She says, thank you guys for this amazing panel. She apologizes for her chaotic behavior, but she found it insightful and enlightening, and she says many, many thanks. So thank you, Tori, for that. And thank you everybody who's listened in as well and who's made comments and asked questions. And yeah, it's been absolutely delightful to be able to see how you've been responding to the comments of the panelists. So yeah, fantastic. Just before we conclude, I just want to go around and just let everybody have an opportunity to tell us about the kind of things that you're working on, the kind of things you got out, and you know, where people can reach out to you and get in touch. So I was going to say let's reverse alphabetically, but I really don't want to go to KB first, so I'm just gonna go from A through to K again. So Adrian, what is it you've been working on? What is it that's out there, and where can people find you?
Well, relevant to this topic, I've got a book coming out it's March in the UK. Hopefully it's about the same time in the US. It's called Alien Clay. It is the most alien of alien books. It's a book about alien ecology and human politics. It is absolutely that book of humans and aliens meeting catastrophically at many levels. It's also trying to imagine a world where evolution doesn't work on Darwinian on traditional Darwinian grounds. So it's a world where the whole setup is very, very different to anything we're used to on Earth.
Oh, that sounds very exciting. Yeah. And in terms of socials, where can people find you?
AdrianTchaikovsky.com is the best way. If you there's a message service there if you want to get word to me. Other than that, I'm mostly on Blue Sky these days.
Fantastic. Thank you. Christopher, what about you?
Well, I did 2 books last year, 2 books in 2 years with 2 kids, which was a bit much. So I'm catching up on my sleep, and I'm currently painting a global map for the world of Eragon, which is I'm doing it some insanely high resolution, so it's taking me a while, but that's a lot of fun. When that's done, I'm going to be jumping back onto the Fractalverse and the world of Eragon, but I don't have anything announced quite yet. As far as social media and everything, if anyone's interested in my science fiction stuff, I would recommend they check out my website, fractalverse.net, which has tons of concept art, free novella, interactive fiction, news, video, audio, music, all sorts of cool stuff from the sci-fi. And then, of course, as far as the socials go, I am on Twitter for X, whatever, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, you name it, I'm there in some capacity. And my main website is paolini.net, which is where you'll find most of the news about all of my projects, fantasy included.
Excellent. Thanks, Christopher. Jenny, what about you?
Yeah, so I've got the 3 books out now. 2 are in a series. 1 is a separate series, and then the 3rd book in the main series is coming out in November, like I said. They all have on-screen aliens of a sort, but lots of that lurking in the background in the history kind of stuff happening in most of them. And on socials, I'm just at JSDewis, and JSDewis is my website. It's the same thing on everything. And then I do have a Patreon that has short stories and art and maps, ship maps, and weird things that I create in Photoshop, if you're interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we'll soon have a chapter from an alien perspective, which is very exciting. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, well, not in the book, but maybe on Patreon, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic, yeah. And then, KB, what about you?
Sweet. I am currently working on edits for the next Neo G book, which is titled "And the Mighty Will Fall." I think it's supposed to come out this fall. We'll see. Timeline kind of got weird, so we're still plugging away at that. You can get the rest of the Neo G books are out now, including the newest one, which is Ghosts of Trappist, which does not have aliens, but it does have AI in it. And I have not been on social much lately. You can find me on Blue Sky, also kbwagers.com for like the rest of my socials. And the newsletter that you can sign up on the website is probably the best like way to really have more up-to-date access on kind of what's going on, and a lot of random hockey talk right now since it's hockey season. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, that all sounds great, guys. Thank you so much for joining us and for your insights. And also, I just want to thank you all, because you may have saved us, because if Elon Musk does get to space and meets the aliens and they listen to this, then they'll know not to judge the entire race based on one person. So that's I think that message has come through loud and clear. So you may have just saved humanity, potentially in this past hour and a half. So thank you all. But yeah, thank you so much for your insights. We've learned so much. And for anybody who's listening in, go check out all of these guys' books. They're awesome. And continue to support TBRCon as well. The next panels that we have through the day are absolutely fantastic. There's some great giveaways that are being run as well from the Broken Binding and others. So just keep a lookout for that as well. But thank you for joining us. And yeah, stay awesome.